Hello, my dear friend. Hope you are doing great. We will talk about healing the past, not by erasing it, but by changing the role it plays in your life, by moving it from the driver's seat to the rearview mirror. We carry the weight of our yesterday into every tomorrow, often wondering why the echoes of the past refuse to fade even as the calendar turns. It is a deeply human experience to feel that the past isn't just a memory, but a living part of our current identity. Here is why those years stay so close to us. Our brains are not designed to be perfect historians. They are designed for survival. The amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus, which forms memories, are neighbors. When an event is tied to a strong emotion, whether it's the warmth of a first love or the sting of a failure, the brain tags it as vital information. We remember the past because our biology believes those lessons are still necessary to protect us today. We are the stories we tell ourselves. To understand who we are now, we rely on the context of who we were. The past remains alive because it provides the foundation for our identity. Without those memories, our sense of self would feel untethered. We revisit the past to remind ourselves of our resilience, our values, and the journey that led us to this specific moment. Sometimes the past stays alive because it feels incomplete. Psychologically, we tend to remember interrupted or unfinished tasks better than completed ones. This applies to emotions too. An unsaid goodbye, a regret, or a what if keeps a loop open in our minds. We replay these scenes not because we want to live in the past, but because our minds are subconsciously trying to find a resolution or a different ending. The past is often triggered by the world around us. A specific scent, a certain frequency of light in the autumn, or a melody can bypass our logical mind and trigger an immediate emotional flashback. These sensory anchors act as bridges, collapsing the distance between decades in a matter of seconds. As we grow, we often look back to reread our own history with new eyes. A memory that felt painful 10 years ago might feel like a vital lesson today. The past stays alive because we are constantly reevaluating it, finding new meanings in old stories as we gain more wisdom. While we often think we've moved on, the past has a way of hiding in our daily habits, influencing our choices from the shadows of our subconscious. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers through patterns we mistake for just being who we are. If you find yourself overreacting to a minor situation, like a small critique at work or a partner forgetting a chore, it's rarely about the present moment. This is often an emotional flashback. When your internal response is a 10, but the situation is only a 2, it's a sign that a past wound has been poked. You aren't reacting to the person in front of you. You're reacting to the person who hurt you years ago. Hypervigilance and waiting for the drop. Do you struggle to enjoy happy moments because you're constantly scanning for what might go wrong? This, waiting for the other shoe to drop, is a defense mechanism. It suggests that in your past, peace was often followed by chaos. By staying anxious, your brain thinks it's preparing you. But in reality, it's just keeping you trapped in an old survival mode. If you feel like you are only as good as your last achievement, the past might be dictating your self-worth. People-pleasing and perfectionism are often leftovers from a time when you felt you had to earn love or safety. You're still trying to prove something to a ghost, perhaps a parent, a teacher, or a peer who made you feel less than long ago. We often seek out what is familiar, even if it's painful. If you find yourself dating the same type of emotionally unavailable person, or befriending people who take advantage of you, you might be stuck in a repetition compulsion. Subconsciously, we recreate old dramas in hopes that this time we can finally win or change the outcome. Sometimes the mind forgets, but the body keeps the score. You might notice your shoulders tensing up, a knot in your stomach, or shallow breathing in specific environments that resemble your past. These are somatic signals that your nervous system is still stuck in a time period you thought you had left behind. That loud critical voice in your head that tells you you're lazy, stupid, or not enough is rarely your own. It is usually an internalized version of someone from your past. If you find yourself talking to yourself in a way you would never talk to a friend, you are still living under the jurisdiction of an old critic. Identifying the link between an old wound and today's exhaustion is often difficult because the pain has become part of our background noise. We've lived with it for so long that we forget it's there. However, emotional wounds consume an incredible amount of internal energy to keep suppressed. Think of an old wound like a background app running on a phone. You aren't actively using it, but it's draining the battery. If you find yourself avoiding certain topics, places, or even specific types of movies because they make you feel weird or heavy, you are using active energy to build walls. If you feel exhausted even after a full night's sleep, it might be because your subconscious spent the whole night guarding those closed doors. Our bodies often speak when our mouths cannot. If you have chronic tension in your neck, unexplained digestive issues, or a tightness in your chest that doctors can't find a physical reason for, it's often a somatic memory. A wound from the past that wasn't processed stays trapped in the nervous system. Your body is tired because it is literally bracing itself against a blow that happened years ago. Observe how long it takes you to recover from a minor emotional setback. If a small disagreement with a friend ruins your entire week or sends you into a spiral of self-doubt, you aren't just dealing with that friend. You are touching an old, raw nerve. When a small event has a long shadow, it's a clear indicator that today's fatigue is fueled by yesterday's unresolved hurt. There's a big difference between being at peace and being numb. If you feel flat, unable to feel deep sadness, but also unable to feel genuine joy, it's a sign of an old wound. To keep the pain of the past away, the mind often muffles all emotions. This state of constant suppression is incredibly taxing on the human spirit, leading to a profound sense of burnout. If you find yourself treating your boss, your partner, or even your children as if they are someone from your past, like a critical parent or an unfaithful ex, you are living in a transference. You are tired because you are fighting a war on two fronts: the reality of the person in front of you and the ghost of the person who hurt you. It feels like a cruel paradox. We run as fast as we can to escape the shadows of our history, yet the harder we sprint, the closer they seem to follow. We aren't running because we are fast. We are running because we are terrified of what happens if we actually stop and let the past catch up. Most of us don't avoid the past because we've forgotten it. We avoid it because we fear that if we open the dam just an inch, the entire reservoir will burst. We worry that the grief, anger, or shame will be so overwhelming that we won't be able to function in our real lives, that we'll lose our jobs, our composure, or our minds. We run because numb feels safer than drowning. Facing the past often requires us to admit things that are deeply uncomfortable. It might mean acknowledging that we were victims when we want to feel strong, or admitting we were wrong when we've built a life on being right. To face the past is to risk the collapse of the version of ourselves we've worked so hard to project to the world. It's easier to keep the lie alive than to rebuild the truth from the ashes. This is a hard truth to swallow. But sometimes we stay in the cycle of running because the wound has become a shield. If we stop and heal the past, we lose our excuses. We lose the reason why we can't commit, why we fail, or why we are unhappy. Facing the past means taking 100% responsibility for our future, and for many, that freedom is more frightening than the familiar pain of the pursuit. We run because we don't know the way back. Most of us were never taught how to process heavy emotions. We were taught to be brave, move on, or suck it up. Without the tools to navigate the darkness of our history, the past looks like a labyrinth with no exit. We keep running because, in our minds, moving forward, even aimlessly, feels better than being trapped in a maze. On a purely neurological level, the brain is a cost-saving machine. Reprocessing a trauma or a deep regret is metabolically expensive and painful. The brain would rather you stick to your current, even if dysfunctional habits, because they are known. It perceives the confrontation of the past as a high-risk gamble, so it encourages the flight response to keep you in the status quo, even if that status quo is slowly killing your spirit. We often treat our memory like a villain or a persistent stalker, trying to lock it away or silence it. But memory isn't trying to sabotage your happiness. It is more like a neglected child or a persistent messenger knocking at your door because it has something vital to deliver. When we shift from fighting our memories to actually listening to them, the dynamic of our internal life changes completely. A recurring memory is rarely about the event itself. It's about the unprocessed emotion attached to it. If you keep remembering a moment of embarrassment from 10 years ago, your memory isn't trying to shame you. It's saying, I still feel unprotected from that moment. By listening, you realize the memory is just a signal flare. It wants you to provide the comfort or the safety now that you didn't have back then. The past stays alive because a version of you is still stuck there. When a memory resurfaces, it's often that younger version of you asking to be seen. By listening to the memory, you are essentially telling your younger self, I see what you went through, and I acknowledge that it was hard. Once a person, or a memory, feels truly heard and validated, they usually stop shouting. When we run from the past, it remains a chaotic, frightening monster. When we sit down and listen to it, we begin to categorize it. We start to see patterns, lessons, and boundaries. Listening allows the brain to move the memory from the active threat folder, the amygdala, to the historical archive folder, the cortex. You aren't deleting the memory. You are simply taking away its power to trigger an alarm. Memory is your mind's way of trying to make you whole again. Every time you push a piece of your past away, you are rejecting a piece of yourself. The memory persists because it wants to be integrated. It wants to be part of your story, not an outcast. When you listen, you allow that broken piece to click back into place, which paradoxically makes you feel much lighter than the running ever did. A memory that is heard eventually stops being a ghost that haunts you and starts becoming a guide that informs you. It loses its emotional sting and becomes wisdom. You can look at the past and say, that happened, it was difficult, and I learned from it, instead of, that is happening, and I am still in pain. Building on that sense of resilience, we have to realize that the past only feels like a monster because we are looking at it through the eyes of the person who was hurt, rather than the person who survived. To truly face those memories without the crushing weight of self-criticism, we have to change the lens through which we view our history. When a memory feels too intense, try visualizing it as if it were a scene in a movie featuring someone else. If you saw a friend going through exactly what you went through, would you yell at them? Would you tell them they were stupid or weak? Of course not. You would likely feel a deep sense of empathy for them. By viewing your past self as a separate character, a younger version of you, you create the emotional distance necessary to offer yourself the same grace you give to others. Sometimes the fear we feel when looking back isn't actually ours. It's the leftover emotion of the situation itself. If you were in a chaotic environment, the vibe of that chaos sticks to the memory. When you revisit it, you aren't failing at being calm. You are simply catching the emotional flu of that old moment. Acknowledging this allows you to say, this anxiety belongs to 2015, not to me right now. This realization prevents you from judging your current state based on old echoes. In every memory of failure or pain, there is a primary truth, what went wrong, and a secondary truth, what you did to endure. We usually obsess over the primary truth. To face the past without fear, you must hunt for the secondary truth. Did you keep going? Did you eventually find a way out? Did you learn a boundary? Shifting the spotlight to your capacity to endure changes the memory from a record of shame into a record of survival. You can't face the past if you don't feel anchored in the present. Before you go back to a memory, physically touch something in your current room, a cold glass of water, the fabric of your chair, or the scent of a candle. Remind your nervous system. My mind is visiting the past, but my body is safe in the present. This prevents the flashback effect where you lose your sense of time, making the confrontation feel like a choice rather than an ambush. Much of our self-flagellation comes from an imaginary version of ourselves that should have known better. We torture ourselves with the idea of a version of us that was perfect, fearless, and wise. But that person didn't exist. You have to mourn the perfect self to accept the real self. Once you stop comparing your past actions to an impossible standard, the leather whip of self-judgment simply falls out of your hand. Once we stop fighting the mirrors of our past and settle into a space of calm observation, we arrive at the most transformative threshold, the simple, raw act of naming what we feel. We often spend years analyzing, intellectualizing, or running from our history. But all the logic in the world cannot do what a single moment of honest acknowledgement can. We often try to think our way out of pain. We tell ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way because it was a long time ago, or others had it worse. This intellectualization is just a sophisticated form of hiding. When you finally say, I am sad, or I am still furious, you stop arguing with your own reality. Acknowledgement isn't an invitation for the feeling to stay forever. It is the exit permit the feeling needs to finally leave. You cannot release what you refuse to admit is there. Much of our daily exhaustion comes from the civil war happening inside us. One part of us feels the pain, while the other part is busy suppressing it. Acknowledgement is the ceasefire. By saying, yes, that hurt me, and I'm still carrying the weight of it, you stop the internal struggle. The moment you stop using your energy to push the feeling down, that energy becomes available for your life, your creativity, and your healing. In folklore, knowing a creature's name gives you power over it. Human psychology is much the same. As long as a feeling is a vague heaviness or tension, it feels invincible. But when you give it a specific name, betrayal, loneliness, or grief, it becomes a finite human thing. It goes from being a giant shadow to a specific emotion that you can actually handle. Naming it brings it into the light, and things in the light are far less terrifying than things in the dark. When you acknowledge a feeling, you are finally acting as a witness for yourself. For years, you might have felt that your pain didn't matter or wasn't valid. By admitting your feelings without judgment, you are providing yourself with the validation you perhaps spent years seeking from others. You are essentially saying to your past self, I believe you, I see your pain, and it matters to me. This internal validation is the foundation of true self-trust. When emotions are unacknowledged, they run our lives through autopilot reactions. We snap at people, we hide, or we self-sabotage without knowing why. Recognition creates a tiny gap between the feeling and the action. Once you acknowledge, I'm feeling triggered because this reminds me of my past, you are no longer a slave to the impulse. You move from being the victim of your emotions to being the steward of them. Once we have named our feelings and allowed them to exist without judgment, we reach the final, most empowering stage of the journey, narrative reclamation. We often think of the past as a finished book, printed in ink and locked in a vault. But the past isn't just what happened. It is the meaning we assign to what happened. While we cannot change the facts of our history, we have the absolute right to pick up the pen and rewrite the conclusion. When we are stuck in an old wound, we tend to view that event as the end of our happiness or our potential. Reauthoring your story means viewing that moment as an origin point instead. It's the difference between saying, I was broken by that loss, and saying, that loss was the moment I began to discover my own depth. You aren't lying about the pain. You are simply shifting the perspective from the destruction to the reconstruction that followed. Every difficult chapter in our lives, no matter how unwanted, leaves behind a residual skill. Perhaps a chaotic childhood made you incredibly perceptive to the needs of others. Perhaps a failure taught you a level of humility that now makes you a better leader. Rewriting your story involves hunting for these accidental strengths. When you identify the wisdom you gained, the memory stops being a debt you owe to the past and starts being an asset you own in the present. In our initial memories, the person who hurt us, or the event that crushed us, is usually the protagonist. They have all the power. Reauthoring the story means moving yourself back to the center of the frame. It's no longer a story about what they did to me, but a story about how I survived it and what I chose to do next. When you decenter the source of the pain, you strip away its authority to define your future. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. It's the realization that while the event was objectively bad, the outcome of your life doesn't have to be. You give the past a new meaning by using it to help others or to fuel a new passion. If your past was defined by silence, your new meaning might be speaking up. If it was defined by neglect, your meaning might be nurturing. By using your past as a foundation for your current purpose, you redeem the time that was lost. The most effective way to rewrite the past is to live a present that the past you would be proud of. Every time you make a healthy choice, set a boundary, or show yourself kindness, you are adding a new triumphant chapter to the old book. You are proving to the memory that its dark ending was actually just a middle chapter. You are the living proof that the story turned out better than the characters in the past could have ever imagined. After we have rewritten our story and found the gifts in the rubble, we arrive at the most quiet, yet most difficult part of the path, turning that newfound compassion inward. We often talk about forgiving those who hurt us as the ultimate goal, but there is a deeper, more urgent work that must happen first. You cannot truly settle the score with the world until you have made peace with the person in the mirror. Self-forgiveness is the bridge between understanding the past and living the future. We are often our own harshest judges because we hold a myth of the better version. We look back and punish ourselves for not being wiser, stronger, or more courageous than we were capable of being at the time. Self-forgiveness starts with acknowledging that your mistakes were often just survival strategies that have outlived their usefulness. You weren't bad. You were simply a human being in the middle of a difficult lesson. Guilt says, "I did something bad," which can lead to growth and correction. Shame, however, says, "I am bad." Shame is the anchor that keeps the past alive and heavy. To forgive yourself, you must dismantle the shame. You have to realize that your actions, especially those born out of pain or fear, do not define your essence. You are the one who experienced the event, not the event itself. True self-forgiveness requires a period of grieving. You have to mourn the time you feel you wasted, the opportunities you missed, or the person you could have been if that past hadn't happened. By allowing yourself to cry for that lost potential, you stop trying to fix a past that is gone and start investing in a present that is actually here. Peace comes when you stop wishing for a better past and start accepting the one you have. Sometimes we need to literally apologize to ourselves. Think of the younger version of you who had to carry all that weight alone, or the version of you that was treated poorly. Instead of blaming that person for being weak, try saying, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you then, and I'm sorry I've been so hard on you lately." This internal apology shifts the relationship from one of persecutor and victim to one of allies and friends. Forgiveness isn't a one-time event, it's hygiene. Old self-critical thoughts will inevitably resurface, especially when you are tired or stressed. The practice is to notice the whip in your hand and gently set it down over and over again. Every time you choose kindness over criticism, you are performing a small act of revolution against your past. When you finally forgive yourself, you realize that the prison guard you've been running from was actually just a part of you that was waiting for permission to let go. Only when your internal war ends can you look at the rest of the world with clear, unburdened eyes. The greatest challenge after doing all this internal work, the naming of feelings, the reframing of stories, and the hard-won self-forgiveness, is the fear that moving on requires us to become cold. We worry that to finally close the door on the past, we have to build a wall around our hearts so that nothing can ever hurt us like that again. But there is a profound difference between a closed door and a hardened heart. Closing the page doesn't mean cutting out the memory or pretending it didn't happen. When we try to surgically remove a part of our history, we lose our sensitivity along with it. To close the page without closing the heart, we treat the past like a finished book on a shelf. It stays in the room with us. Its lessons are accessible, but we are no longer writing in it. You remain open because you realize that your history is a source of depth, not just a source of damage. A hardened heart is a defensive heart. It assumes it is too fragile to handle another blow. Closing the chapter means reaching a level of self-trust where you can say, "I am open to new people and experiences because I finally trust myself to handle whatever comes." You don't stay open because the world is safe. You stay open because you have become your own safe harbor. Your openness is no longer a sign of weakness, but a testament to your resilience. We often confuse closing our hearts with setting boundaries. A barricade keeps everyone out. A boundary is a gate that lets the right people in and keeps the wrong patterns out. By closing the past, you learn the flavor of your old pain. You can now spot it from a mile away. This awareness allows you to be warm and open to the world because you know you have the discernment to say no to anything that tastes like the old shadows. The past is a place of shadows and echoes. The present is a place of textures, smells, and light. To keep your heart open, you have to practice coming home to your senses. When you feel the pull of the old shut-down mechanism, intentionally look for something beautiful in your current environment. This keeps your heart soft and engaged with the reality of 2026, rather than the ghosts of the years before. An ironclad heart cannot be hurt, but it also cannot be reached. It cannot feel the sun, and it cannot receive the new love that is trying to find it. To truly close the page is to realize that the past was a thief. It already took enough of your time. Don't let it take away your capacity for joy, too. By staying open, you are committing the ultimate act of defiance against your old wounds. You are choosing to thrive in spite of them. Closing the past is not an act of forgetting, but an act of releasing. You lay the burden down so that your hands are finally empty and ready to hold whatever beautiful thing comes next. In the end, moving forward isn't about leaving pieces of yourself behind. It's about finally gathering them all into a story you can live with. You don't have to wait for the memories to disappear to be happy. You just have to reach the point where they no longer get to decide who you are today. The past may always be a part of the landscape, but you are finally the one holding the map and choosing the direction.